Well, good morning, and good morning. Hey, George.
Good morning. G'day, mate. How's it going?
I should have said that too. Good morning. How are you? Yeah, it's going good, man. How you doing?
Good. I'm had last week was the break, the mid-semester break here down in Dunedin. So back into it this week, and the university with the orange traffic light seems to be a bit I'm noticing less masks or that sort of thing, which is interesting because I feel like you should just keep your mask on regardless, but the students maybe are being a bit more lax with that now. But we might get more in class, in person sort of lectures and that sort of thing now that it's orange. But yeah, things move a bit slowly. Other than that, feeling pretty good. Winter energy payment is coming up. Pretty keen on the working income. And on the 1st of May, we'll be adding the winter energy payment to anyone on a benefit. In fact, I think people should look into being eligible for that because it's not, I don't think you have to necessarily be on a job seeker benefit to get it. I think others might be eligible.
Students?
They might have to go through StudyLink, which is always a problem. But if they're not through, So
how much is it?
Oh, it's like $20 a week or something. $30 a week if you got dependents.
Yeah. How much do you pay for power? Do you know?
Nah. I'm pretty conservative with our heat pump.
Yeah.
Like I'll turn it on, and once it's up to temperature, I'll usually turn it off.
Wow. No, I mean, you've been to my place. You know, there's some size to the building. We pay probably summer maybe 150 a month. Winter can be up to sort of 350, 400 a month because there's people downstairs and there's people upstairs and there's a studio sucking energy all the time. But I typically put $50 to $75 a week into the account every week. So therefore, I don't change my payments in winter from I do from summer. So in summer, it goes credit. And then in winter, it starts to suck all that credit away. And then in summer, it starts building up again. And that's how I typically pay my power. So I can budget for it rather than be freaked out by one particularly bad month. Let's say July in Dunedin, where it hasn't got above 7 degrees all year, all month.
Yeah. We seem to be about 100 a month, I think. Our heat pump is like installed directly above our front door, our drafty front door, which is funny.
No, I used to have that when we had a little place up in Walkery, which was only 3 bedrooms, only like 90 square meters, the house. We put a big 7.5 kilowatt heat pump above the front door. You turn it on and it felt like within 5 minutes the house was warm. So, yep, I get that. It's when you have kids and have, bigger properties, and I got a delivery of firewood this week, so we had a fire on yesterday, so that's nice. But people in Auckland won't understand this because it's not even May yet. But in Dunedin, heat pumps basically go on for us about this time of year, maybe a few weeks ago, and stay on until basically November. So, and coming from the top of the North Island, though, you won't get it because very rarely do you even need a fire in Auckland. You do sometimes, but not like colder parts.
Yeah.
But anyway,
man.
You don't get me. Hey, we're gonna have a talk, and I was interested to hear what you said about the students, because we are going to have a talk to Professor Michael Plank today from University of Canterbury about where we are currently with Omicron, because there's a couple of things going on. I know we've talked about this before, but it appears that if the modeling to get kind of a flat line is about 1,000 cases a day per million people, that means here in southern DHB, 300,000 people should be getting 300 cases a day. We're still getting between 750 and 1,000 cases a day just in Southern. So that says to me we're 3 times what we should be, which says to me we're still in a really serious moment. But like you've just said, there's a bit of an attitude going around at the moment that, we're in orange, so we're all good. But actually, the case numbers in Southern are actually probably around 3 times what they should be. And we've just seen the 7-day average starting to tick back up again. So we want to talk about that. I also want to talk a bit about where we are in the world, because at one stage we were 190th, 200th in the world, meaning doing very, very well. We're now in the 60s, like 64th in the world for our case numbers. Now we're doing much better with deaths, but with case numbers, we've jumped to 64th in the world. And I kind of think if we're about the 120th country in the world for population, that means if you're at 190th in the world for your results, that's really good because that's good per capita. But if you're 60th in the world, that means per capita you're not doing quite so well. And I want to talk a little bit maybe about if Michael can explain it, he may or may not be able to, about why we've gone from 195th in the world to 64th in the world. When if you think the whole world's had Omicron, so the whole world's trying to sort of shift on the same proportions, but we for some reason have jumped from being way down the bottom to, in the top third with Omicron. And it has New Zealand done really badly with Omicron compared to the rest of the world? That's what I want to talk to him about as well. Or is it that just the rest of the world aren't recording their cases anymore and they're just getting on with life? Or I don't know, whatever. And we will have a quick touch base on, I was going to say on Tesla, not Tesla, on Elon and Twitter today as well, especially because the narrative's going around at the moment. You got to offend the left as much as you do the right, and that's how you have a democracy. Well, I was like, well, if one of those aspects, and I'm not even picking a side right now, but one of those aspects only represents 5% of the views, it doesn't need to be given even weighting. Anti-vaxxers don't need to be given the same amount of time on air as the 95% of the population and 99% of scientists who disagree with them. It doesn't have to be an even weighting for different opinions if one of the opinions is an incredibly minor, potentially dangerous opinion. So we might have a bit of a talk about that as well. But George, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, we should get to our first guest.
Yep.
Alex Brickle from up in Auckland. He's a political commentator. We'll bring him in. Welcome to the show, Alex.
Morning.
We've got Alex on today to sort of, I guess, round up the politics of the week, or sort of look towards the election, and sort of maybe assess where Labour and National are at. Alex, maybe I'll start with a sort of the question: will Labour win the next election?
Oh, wow. Good question. It's the question probably on every political commentator's minds. They have to do 2 things, right? Because one of the thing that Labour, I think, is really lacking is they're lacking a stable vision of what to do in the sort of post-COVID environment. They're saying that they have one. They'll people like Grant Robertson, who writes the budget, will always claim that they have a post-COVID vision, but they really do not. I mean, they're struggling on many different fronts and many different issues to actually fix some of the problems that they claim were created by the last national government. And so what they really need to do is simply to deliver on some of the promises that they made in the previous election campaign. And the election campaign before that. They came up with a slogan, I think it was for their second year that they were in power, or that this year would be the year of delivery. And it turns out to have not really delivered very much, except, of course, the necessity of a COVID response. So they need to deliver on key aspects like welfare, like transport, all those things. But they also need to, funnily enough, go on the attack more. I think the kindness mantra of Jacinda Ardern is not just about her. It's also a mantra that she has kind of dispersed to the entire party. And with the exception of people like Grant Robertson, who are kind of, they're attack dogs, where people like Robertson. The party's very slow to attack National on some of the areas where they actually are vulnerable to attack. Like, for example, National's latest tax policy. They haven't done, I think, enough to come out publicly and say exactly why National's tax policy is economically silly. in this current time. You know, they're touting, Nationals touting it as a solution to inflation, but it is a policy that is itself inflationary. I mean, that contradiction needs to be brought into the public space. So that's really what Labour needs to do. And on tax itself, I mean, we had a wonderful, again, a promise of some kind of future in the tax area with the tax principles legislation that David Parker came up with this week. But it's not enough, because it's merely asking IRD to collect data that it should already have on the wealthiest New Zealanders, how much tax they're paying, and then perhaps potentially this will lead to the creation of new taxes or some kind of new policy or whatever. And that kind of promise of a vision, they need to get beyond that in order to actually present themselves to New Zealanders as being a government in continuation, where National actually has, well, one concrete idea, but it's currently more than what Labour seems to have.
I wonder as well, I mean, Labour's not doing much at the moment to rebut those ideas, because the media seems to be doing it quite well on their behalf. I mean, there's the Jack Tame conversation from the weekend, and we played Tova's conversation with Christopher Luxon from yesterday, and it seems that the job is being done for them. I joked yesterday after the conversation between Christopher Luxon, I'm not sure if you heard it or not, Alex, and Tova O'Brien on Today FM, that they've just created the first campaign advert for Labour for next year. You know, CEO of Air New Zealand gets a $250,000 tax break, you know, whereas people are still going to food banks, so to speak. There's the first campaign ad done. I know this is naive of me to say, but I do wonder, even though it's naive, I wonder if they're a little bit keeping their powder dry, because I think it appears to me that either they've got bad policy or Christopher Luxon is not doing well in selling the national policy. It's one of those two things, because he's getting caught in these conversations where I think the majority of New Zealand are going, what do you mean you don't need a tax cut? Hang on, but you're giving yourself and your wealthy friends tax cuts. If you don't need it, why are you doing it? So he's not doing well at selling their vision. And I just wonder if Labour made too much noise right now, if that would be indicative of National changing something. Like, because Christopher Luxon has said we'll have a full rounded policy by the time election comes around. And maybe it's a bit like how the Republicans, I don't think the Republicans want Donald Trump on Twitter because of what damage he'll do to the Republican message. I wonder if Labour aren't doing much at the moment because they kind of want National next year to have these policy positions. And if they point out all the foibles now, then maybe it'll help National change. Like I said, I know that's probably being a bit naive and a bit idealistic, but it was a thought I had this morning about them. They're keeping their mouths shut and letting the policies just sit as they were for National. So therefore, they're not going to help National point out the holes that they should change.
Yeah, well, you raise a valid point. I mean, I guess this is to consider the other side of the political divide. And I mean, it is still, I mean, they now have a new leader, the National Party, but the same chaos and tumult of a serious lack of vision is there on the other side as well. And I think it's really interesting how the media has really changed its tack on Christopher Luxon, because one of the things I've been saying for a long time is that Luxon is probably New Zealand's first example of an entirely media-driven political candidacy. Like, we heard from really the media and journalists and no one else about Christopher Luxon's political ambitions. I actually went yesterday and looked at a lot of articles from 2018 and 2019, which all led up to Luxon leaving Air New Zealand as the CEO of Air New Zealand. And they all mentioned speculation about Luxon's political ambitions. It's been widely talked about that Luxon is considering a future in politics. And really, it still begs the question of who besides the media was talking about this. And it really, it's not surprising that Luxon is now the leader of the National Party if you follow the bouncing ball. After he registered 1%, I mean, in a preferred prime minister poll, how many people does that survey? 500 people. So that's what, 5 people saying that they want Luxon as prime minister. The media ran with that and was saying, look, the future leader, Luxon. Now he's here.
But so it's become a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. In other words,
they've said it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And actually, you'll know this guy if you live in Dunedin, Pete George, the man who ran for mayor. He was, I think he was a member of United Future, or stood for United Future at one point. He also wrote a piece about this and followed the bouncing ball from that 1% preferred prime minister poll and said, this is profoundly undemocratic when the media is acting as a talent scout for politicians rather than allowing parties to do their due diligence and select candidates for themselves using not altogether transparent processes, as we've seen with Larissa Wall and her candidate selection in the Labour Party. But it's quite interesting to see now the media realise what they've created with Christopher Luxon, because he entirely lacks political knowledge. And
I wonder if it's, we hear tropes from various sectors of society talking about how the media is left-wing and bias. So following that bouncy ball, I wonder if that means, has the media done a fantastic job of being left-wing infiltrators by putting someone in charge of the National Party who's actually not that appropriate to be in charge of the National Party? Or is it that trope is just horse shit? And I think I know which I would vote for.
We did see that, like, it was interesting how, sorry, Alex, it was interesting how, just sort of almost depending on their mood, the AM show would be really sympathetic and almost helping and coaching Luxon through the morning of, umming and ahhing and on policy and that sort of thing. And then suddenly a week later, maybe flip on it on Luxon. Although, I think
maybe they read the writing as well. Maybe they were like, hang on, maybe we can't get behind the candidate like we thought we could for a while.
Yeah, maybe it swings back around though, right? Depending on the, I guess what remains though in that sort of, whether the media is doing the pro or opposing Luxon, it still sets the debate. It still sets the parameters of what is possible in debate, right, Alex? And I wonder if you wanted to put on a more idealistic cap and maybe say, have a chance to, if you had the chance to, I guess what I'm getting at is, like, are we having the right debate about tax, for example? Is this the debate that New Zealand politics should be having, or is there something else that Labour or other political groups should be encouraging us to talk about?
Yeah, well, I think National at one point desperately wanted the election to be about tax, and so it could promote its flagship tax cut policies, but they don't seem to be going down very well with the electorate. And I think Grant Robertson has done half the job of neutralising the tax cut policy for National, although not the whole job, because I think perhaps Luxon might do the other half himself. But it really a few questions remain that are not answered by this sort of narrow debate about tax that we're currently having. And I think that's why the electorate has every right to be disappointed in Labour's kind of weak solution to the issue with the tax principles bill that was produced this week. Because we have a problem at the moment still that remains from, 10, 15 years ago in the housing market that needs to be talked about and is currently being avoided because it's inconvenient for the Labour Party to talk about, because they have only presided over really failures in this area. And I'm talking about housing for the poorest in the country, not new builds as they like to talk about, which really is about housing for the middle and upper middle classes. There's a problem in with the emergency housing system that they've got. Labor promised to end the housing of people in motels, but all it's really done is expanded that system and created more problems for itself in that area. So really, the election should be about this, because housing really, I mean, the primary desire of human beings is to have shelter. I mean, that's if you don't have shelter, then you really cannot live. It's not a dignified life. So given that we have so many problems in this area, that should be the foundational issue of the election. Unfortunately, Labor's kind of taken the bait, and it looked like they're going to have this real clash on tax. But Labor's kind of bringing a wet bus ticket to the election with this bill, and not really any concrete policies. Where it's a shit policy, but they do have a policy.
Yeah. I think about the American election system, and I think they start campaigning for president about 2 to 3 years out from the next. They're doing it now, and it's 2.5 years away, or whatever it is. We don't seem to have that same kind of practice in New Zealand, but it does seem that, I think specifically around COVID, the last election was no matter what people say, I think a COVID election. That's why Labor got the majority, because of their response to COVID and nothing else. Is that perhaps it's just become, since the mandates came in October, November, it's become okay to start criticizing the government's practice and what they've been doing and what they are doing. So it feels like that electioneering has started now to lead up to the next election. When do you think it becomes actually kind of valid? We really need to see policy and stuff, but all this kind of twittering around the outside edges of the conversation with, we've got this idea, tell us more about it, you'll find out later, when it actually becomes real for us to look at it and go, okay, time to make a decision, time to decide who we're going to vote for and why.
Oh, when does it become valid? Well, I guess the New Zealanders, politicians perhaps are aware of the audience that they have. I don't think New Zealanders would take kindly to a 2.5 year long political campaign. I think they would be profoundly sick of it by the end of it. But I think, nonetheless, political parties really need to start thinking about the policy program that they're taking to the election now. And I don't profess to have extreme insider knowledge of the parties, but I wonder if perhaps the paucity of policy that we're getting is influenced by the profound uncertainty of what the electorate actually wants at this current juncture. I think the political sphere in New Zealand after the sort of catastrophe that we had with COVID, which has kind of realigned. The 2020 election realigned politics for many people, especially with the vaccine mandates and so forth. And the groups that have formed around the opposition to the vaccine mandates. I was reading, for instance, it was very unfortunate to see about my hometown with the closure of the Marsden Point oil refinery and the protests that are going on around that. And I think those protests are really are very legitimate about the closure of the oil refinery. But it was very distressing to see that the people leading those protests, a lot of the self-proclaimed leaders of that protest, are the very same people who were occupying Parliament grounds in Wellington. And so you've got a kind of chaos with respect to political alignment. Maybe that's why political parties are a bit unsure about what foot to lead with. And you also have a few question marks about these new parties that are coming up as well, which probably, as we head into the election year, will probably become more prominent. Again, talking about Northland, former Northland MP Matt King's new party, which seems to be coalescing around the same disinformation campaign that a lot of that anti-vax, again, self-proclaimed leaders coalesce around. I think those kind of far-right vehicles, whatever you want to call them, they will become more prominent too as we head into the election year. So I think, still too early to call, but in a few months' time, as we get closer to 2023, it's going to become clearer who is playing in this election and what they're playing for and what they're promising to the New Zealand public.
Alex, to wrap up, and the election is a while away, but it does seem like, at the moment, tax is the debate, the boring old debate that we're having. Well, how might we? And you would call yourself a leftist, possibly, and I would do the same. What are the prospects for a movement like that in New Zealand? Maybe in the sort of medium term or before the election. Like, how do we? Is it a case of influencing the Labour Party? Is it a case of sort of extra parliamentary movements? Is it a case of maybe even trying to harness that populism that you described of the people protesting, but sort of being maybe a sort of diffuse group of people that maybe needs more direction and so forth? What are the prospects for an actual leftist movement in New Zealand? And does it sort of maybe suffer from, I guess, Jacinda and the Labour Party sort of having such a hold on that political space?
Yeah, well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but in the short term, it's not very good. There is potential, I think, for something to build among the working class, especially given the kind of generalized social crisis that we seem to be heading into, with the rises in the cost of living, with inflationary pressures, with other pressures coming in domestically and internationally as well. I mean, the Labour Party is a very labyrinthine structure, and I say this with unfortunately with experience. The Labour Party is very much become a middle class vehicle, for which mainly there is a sort of straight line from the student politics all the way up to becoming an MP. I mean, the right wing kind of characterizations of Labour as being a vehicle for these people are not altogether untrue, although unfortunately for them, I would say the same thing about the National Party. Yeah. For the prospects of a left-wing movement, well, unfortunately, the left in recent history has not had a very good run with respect to who it involves itself with and the types of vehicles that they have relied on in recent history to become elected. I mean, we had obviously the collapse of the alliance in 2002. That's what a lot of people look to as being like the halcyon days of the 20th century left, which lasted in the 20th century a grand total of 2 years. And then you have other failed starters like, the Mana Party and its unholy alliance with Kim.com and the sort of hacktivist crowd, which failed miserably, as it was always going to. And I think now the left wing has kind of comfortably ensconced itself in either the Labour or the Green parties, which is to its disservice, as we're now seeing with the sort of failure of the current government to do anything. And Ardern is and you're right to point out that she does have a fandom, and she's very popular, and she captures the imaginations of young people. Don't know quite how, but she's a very charismatic figure, and an exemplary communicator. But unfortunately, that doesn't translate into doing anything for the people that the leftist movement really should be concerning itself with, which is the working classes. So what the left wing has to do is it has to concentrate on what the working class actually needs and wants at this point in time. What we want for the working class, as if you are a leftist, this is what you should believe, is to, at the very first instance, make their conditions of living and working better. And if you are quite firmly to the left, then you want to abolish the exploitative conditions that they live and work under. And presently, the left, the left as it is established now, seems either to willing to accept those conditions, or they don't even acknowledge or think about the conditions of the working classes. So that's a huge problem with being ensconced in the Labour and Green parties, is that they're not really currently thinking about this, and not even the Green Party, not the Māori Party, they're not thinking about this either. Although they might make gestures to that effect, but it's not translating into anything concrete. So that's what a leftist movement has to do, is reconfigure and realign itself with the needs and desires of the working classes.
Sweet. Well, thank you very much, Alex, for popping in and having a look towards the election. And yeah, hope to see you again one day as well. You're more than welcome to come back on whenever you want. So yeah, thanks.
Sure. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Sweet.
Good chat.
You're muted, Pat.
There we go. Thanks. I was saying thanks. What happens when you turn your mic off occasionally, but normally you're the loudest mouth on the thing, is that when you do turn it off, you forget about it. Simon was saying on the thing as well, I would have very similar experience with the Labour Party. They seem to be a very middle class and well-to-do party. I would probably throw in there fairly white at the moment as well, it feels to me. And then Simon also mentions, maybe this is bouncing off the back of it, is maybe there is a new left-wing party opening opposed to Labour. I wonder if that's the case.
I see an opening for it. Yeah.
So
yeah, I think it's difficult, right? I think that the prospects for parliamentary success is difficult unless you could get together, like if you could sort of align yourself with the Māori Party and a few other parties. But I think that the Greens and Labour, as Alex was saying, have well and truly become left behind their leftist roots.
Well, you kind of see it happening in America at the moment with the Democrats, because they've got the progressive caucus and the centrists and the centre lefts and all within that same party. It's the same for the Republicans, I guess. And we don't have that in New Zealand because our progressives, quote unquote progressives, are just in the Greens. But maybe there is a place for a third party on the left. I do think actually there's a place for a second party another party on the right, because I think that National doesn't represent everyone from the kind of centre through to ACT. I reckon there's an in-between there as well, in my opinion, that could be service as well. In fact, there's probably a position, and the Māori Party were this for a while, of a centrist party that could work with both sides, and maybe that's what it is. Maybe Labour needs to be a bit more to the left, with the Greens further to the left. A centrist party might be the place where there's a spot at the moment, and then there's Labour starting on centre right, National starting on centre right across to ACT on the far right. So maybe that's where the gap is at the moment. And I do wonder, when we always talk about the majority of us are centrist, and it's the 30% on either end of the political spectrum that decide the government each time around. I wonder how true that is, and I wonder if that is in there. Although you are stuck with the problem of being a jack of all trade and master of none. I know I wasn't there, and I know when More FM started up, they did a lot of research as to what the kind of station they wanted to be was. And so they did all this research. They were interacting with listeners, and they were holding focus groups and all this kind of stuff. And what came back was the idea of a middle of the road station. Exactly. And so they set up the station at the start, which was middle of the road. And then when people heard it was middle of the road, they all got offended and say, I'm not middle of the road, because people think of themselves as sort of unique, fairies, and wanting to be special and wanting to be a bit this way or a bit that way. Whereas when you tell them that they're all sort of fairly bland and boring, they don't like to hear it. So I wonder, a political party kind of negating my own point, setting itself up as bland and boring, might eventually have to eat itself, because no one will want to vote. No one will identify themselves as being bland and boring with a bland and boring party.
I think that's the problem with the sort of neoliberal era and these centrist parties of Labour and National or especially Labour, that has totally left behind its working class roots and become I guess the trend, the neoliberal trend is to almost depoliticize or try and move away from ideology towards so-called outcome-based policies and realistic almost technocracy, right? That we're going to govern through experts rather than having some sort of ideological basis to how we govern.
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of what's sort of sucked some of that political antagonism out of our politics.
Speaking of democracy, Twitter comes to mind. Autocracies, democracies. Wanted to talk really quickly, and we've got Michael Plant coming up in just a few minutes. So just a quick chat about Twitter at the moment. Elon putting out a tweet in the last kind of 8:30 this morning, New Zealand time. For Twitter to deserve public trust, it needs to be politically neutral, which effectively means upsetting the far right and the far left equally. Just very quickly, the reason that I wanted to kind of put this out there and mention that's in general, it's sort of in general an idea that most people will agree with. You support both sides. You deride both sides, and everyone has a bit of a chat. But when you've got a political party or a position or an ideology that's a minority view and a dangerous view, it therefore shouldn't be given equal time as the not. And the example that obviously we could use now was, the 99% of scientists who agree that the vaccine is a good thing should not get the same airtime and be quote unquote equally upset as the 1% of people on the far end of the spectrum saying vaccines are implanting microchips in us. So it's an idea that I think I like the idea. I'm a free speech advocate, and I like the idea of going. I don't have a huge issue with Elon Musk buying Twitter. So be it. Get on with it. But then again, I'm also not the kind of person that's going to feel attacked or impacted by, if it turns into a more harmful place to be. It's not going to impact me. So my views on that are obviously incredibly biased by my safety as who I am and what I represent. But I also want to say that this idea of free speech and democracy doesn't necessarily mean everyone has equal say and everyone has an equally valid position, because that's just not the case. If that was the case, when you hear groups like Fox News go, we tell both sides of the story, it's like, it's not true. We provide, you decide. It's not true, because we all know no one's going to put up an argument that says, here is a conversation around why suicide amongst the under 10s is a good thing. Here is a conversation around suicide under 10s is a bad thing. You're never going to have that conversation, because one part of it doesn't deserve equal, validity, and that would never even happen. So it's always a bit of smoke and mirrors when people say, democracy, free speech, both sides need to. It's not about that. It's about and it doesn't mean that minority views don't get shared either, by the way. It means really harmful and dangerous views don't need to have the same weight as healthy and safe views, is what I'm saying, George.
It's like the Trump classic where he's like, there were good people on both sides at Charlottesville.
Which on one level is probably true, but there might have been one good person on one side and 99 bad ones and 99 good people on the other side. And let's be honest, maybe one bad one that was in that crowd. And so they don't need to be given the same weight.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
No,
I'm agreeing with you. I'm like, it's when he says that's what I'm saying is when you say this idea about giving both sides a perspective, that on its surface level seems accurate and fair and okay, but it's actually, we need to go a step deeper and go, actually, if it's a dangerous and harmful minority view, not minority as in ethnically, but just literally percentage wise, then it doesn't need to be given the same consideration as the safe, healthy alternative. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it is hilarious that this is Elon's idea for fixing Twitter. Is it needs to be politically neutral, which means upsetting the far right and far left. It's hilarious, and also saying something is politically neutral, and that it's just going to be based on I don't know, realistic fairness or whatever it is often quite a political position in itself or ideological position in itself.
And it normally comes from a place where you go, my side is being harmed and your side are being bullies. So we have to be politically neutral. If it was the other way around, like the example I just gave of ludicrousy, they wouldn't be saying that. So it's sort of a victim-based mentality as well, that I think a lot of the time. All right. This conversation with Twitter will go on as well. I think we've got the CEO of 2ANZ coming on tomorrow. We'll have a bit of a touch base on it there. But right now, we want to welcome to the show from the University of Canterbury, Professor Michael Plank. I'm going to say friend of the show. Michael, thanks for joining us, mate.
Kia ora, Pat.
I appreciate you giving us some time this morning. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about where we are at the moment with COVID. You and I have chatted before, and we've chatted about modelling. We've chatted about where we're projected to go and where we are going. I guess from your perspective as someone who's been involved in the modelling, how are we doing right now based on how we thought we would be doing?
I think we've tracked pretty closely to how we thought we would be doing. Once the Omicron wave started off in New Zealand, in terms of things like the number of people in hospital, the size of the peak, and that sort of thing. We are in a long tail now, and that's something we always expected. It's something that the models don't necessarily always do a good job with, because I think the reasons for that long tail are quite complex, and they're to do with people's behaviour to some extent, which is always a tricky thing to try and model. But that's the stage we're in now. Cases have been coming down, but they are starting to come down slower and slower as we move into a situation where COVID is the new normal, really. I mean, we're not going to get back down to the sorts of numbers of cases that we had over summer, for example. I think we'll continue to see case numbers in the thousands, certainly through the winter period.
I was listening to an epidemiologist, and forgive me, I can't remember which one it was, the other day, talking about our baseline will be about 5,000 a day. And they were saying it's 1,000 cases per million people was the model that they were using to say would be about a baseline. Now, I'm in Southern DHB, and in the Southern DHB, there are 300,000 people. That means that model, if that's the right word, or that projection, means we should be getting about 300 cases a day based on that 1,000 per million. Now, we're still getting 900 a day here in Southern. I had a chat with Susie Wiles a couple of Fridays ago, and one of the frustrating things for me is the whole country going to orange, when here in the deep south, we're still getting 3 times what the projected sort of flat line would be. And now that I'm seeing, and let me put this up here, seeing the 7-day average start to tick back up again, and conversations and articles that we're seeing on places like stuff talking about the second wave, I'm wondering, I'm concerned that we're going to kind of be in this malaise of not at that base level, which we've been told is about what it should be, and not at a peak big enough to do anything about for the rest of the year. And I'm having conversations in my household, which is like, fuck, are we now at a point where we're just going to, okay, so like, because I've been a strong proponent of, I don't want to catch this thing. I'm taking precautions not to. I'm not shutting myself off to the world, but I'm reducing risk areas. But it's like, I feel like I can only do that for so long. Am I going to give up that 3 or 4 months of work that I've put in to stay safe and keep my little community safe, and then go out and catch it next week, which means all my work feels like it's sort of negated? I kind of feel a bit let down by the government. That's a part of it. But also I'm concerned to see these numbers and trying to figure out, I'm trying to plan what I'm going to do for the next few months as well. Like, what do we do? What are we seeing in the numbers?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are in this situation at the moment, and it is really tough because it's not just the rest of the year, it's the rest of your life. COVID's not going away. This thing is going to still be here. And I have to say it, I think the vast majority of people will catch COVID, and they will probably catch COVID multiple times during their lives. Now, that's not to say that everything's inevitable and we should be fatalistic and we shouldn't do anything to try and control COVID, because we absolutely should. But we are moving into a new normal now where COVID isn't going to go away. And it was really important that we took that precautionary approach during the first wave, because we really needed to limit pressure on healthcare systems and flatten the curve and reduce the size of that peak. That was crucial. But we're moving into the marathon now. We need to move into a way of managing this as a long-term public health issue that is going to be with us for the foreseeable future.
But what's different about it? Like, I've said this before on the show, my father got polio in 1948, and that's gone away. You know, smallpox, that's gone away. Vaccines can deal with these things. What's so different about COVID that we're now thinking, as you've just said, it depresses me beyond belief. I'm like, oh, well, if this is for the rest of our lives multiple times, then we might as well all just go and get it now. I mean, it's the first time I've said that publicly because I don't kind of believe it, but I think that we've seen many serious infectious diseases and viruses be put to bed through vaccines. What's different about COVID?
It's this is not my main area, but I can talk to it a little bit, which is that for things like measles and some of those other viruses, smallpox, that we have managed to either get rid of completely or to sort of effectively eliminate, the vaccines that we have and the immunity that you get from infection is really strong, and it stops you from getting infected again. That's not the case with COVID. We know that, you know, it's quite possible for you to get infected after having been vaccinated, and we also know increasingly that it is possible to be infected again after you've had the virus previously. So it's the nature of the virus. These seasonal coronaviruses, you don't get lifelong immunity either from vaccination or from infection. And the same with flu, right? I mean, we have flu vaccines, but the way that the virus evolves means that we're never able to completely get rid of it. And so and I don't want to underplay vaccines. The vaccines are still incredibly important because they stop you getting seriously ill, but they're not going to stop you from being infected for the rest of your life, like a measles vaccine would do a good job of doing.
It's a different message all of a sudden, isn't it? I mean, we didn't know at the start what was going on, and then now it feels very different. It's actually slightly depressing, this conversation, what we've just said about where we're going to go from here. Because, you know, I mean, if we think about it being around forever, my words, not yours exactly, it's like that means all of those vulnerable people who we've been trying to protect at some stage are likely going to get it. And what does that mean for their health and for people who are, or does that mean all of us, if it's going to be around for 30 years, who are in our 40s now, who are then going to be our 70s, are all going to get it more seriously later on? And you know what I mean? It's just, it's quite a depressing conversation now. That not what you've said, but the idea behind having to deal with this for a very long time.
Yeah. I mean, it is a bit depressing. It's not a nice virus.
No.
But I mean, you know, if you have infections, if you have reinfections, if you're infected multiple times, you will have some immunity from that, and that immunity will massively reduce the chance of getting severely ill with the virus. So, I mean, I'm hesitant to compare it to flu because it's not flu, it's more infectious than flu, and I think it's probably going to be a bigger public health threat than flu is. But we don't go out and try and catch flu. We try and avoid getting the flu. And if someone's got the flu, please stay at home. Don't come out. I don't want to see you. You don't want to be spreading flu around.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you know, probably accept that you're going to get flu at some point, but you still try and take actions to prevent that. And those actions are really important.
I'd really like to ask you, I haven't necessarily prepped you for this, but I'd like to ask you about something to do with where we stand in the world now with our COVID cases. And I feel like, you know, you being a modeler and being in the mathematics department, this might be an area that you can explain to me, because I kind of don't understand what's happened here. New Zealand was lauded as this country in the world that was doing better than anybody for a long time, you know, primarily. And if you look at our population on these charts that we're being shown, like the one I have up here about COVID, we ended up being about the 120th country in the world when it comes to population. And when it came to our COVID response and our total cases, we were like 195th in the world. So in other words, we were far lower on the scale than what our population size was. So we were doing very well per capita. Now, since Omicron's come in, we've gone from 195th in the world, and as you can see, I'm looking at the live numbers here, to 64th in the world. So again, if we're the 120th-ish country in the world when it comes to population, to be at 60th seems to be that per capita we're not doing as well now, because you'd expect it to be 120th country should be sitting at the 120th place, all things being equal. But it's not just that we're not doing as well numbers-wise. I'm wondering, as an ignorant person when it comes to statistics and mathematics, to go from being 195th in the world to 64th in the world, at the same time the rest of the world has also had Omicron. So in my mind, I kind of go, well, if they've all had it, all their numbers will go up proportionally as well. Does this mean that we've had Omicron affecting New Zealand particularly badly when it comes to case numbers? Because we haven't just jumped to where we are in the world of 120th, we've gone beyond that to 64th in the world when we were 195th in the world. And I look at that now and go, we're not the shining light anymore when it comes to case numbers. We still are very good when it comes to deaths, let's make that clear. But when it comes to case numbers, we're not the shining light anymore, and I'm wondering why. Does anything in the numbers or the modelling explain that?
I think by and large, we've experienced a similar Omicron wave to lots of other places. In terms of the case numbers, cases are a bit difficult because it's subject to testing and people getting tested, but also in terms of the health impacts, the number of hospitalizations that we've had in the Omicron wave. We're in the same boat really now as many other countries. We did really, really well. We avoided the horrendous death tolls that many other countries have seen in the pre-vaccine era. The combination of vaccines and Omicron has changed the game now. We're in a fundamentally different situation now to what we were in March of 2020. But yeah, we're no longer any different than anywhere else, really. We have Omicron. We've had an Omicron wave very similar at a broad level to most other countries, and we're going to continue to experience this similar sorts of outcomes that other countries are doing going forward, I think.
When you say we're no different, we're getting the same thing as all the other countries, does that therefore, when it comes to case numbers, purely the case numbers that we've had, because we've jumped so far up the scale, I mean, I'm actually having a look as I talk to you about the numbers. I should bring it back up so people know what I'm looking at. And it looks like there aren't below us, like below 64 in the world. There doesn't seem to be any sort of, if I can say, similar countries, Commonwealth countries, primarily, I guess, Western democracies below us. I mean, there are some, but there doesn't seem to be many. Does that mean that compared to our like-minded countries, and I'm thinking about, the Australias and the Americas and the UKs and the South Africas and the ones that are kind of we're compared to often, we're still doing quite well? I'm still kind of confused as to how we've jumped from 195th in the world to 64th in the world when everyone else has been through it, and why it seems to have impacted us numbers-wise so badly.
I mean, I think this way of looking at it as a ranking system is probably not the best thing to do. I mean, if you want to compare countries, really look at the rates per 100,000, something like that. So, the number of cases per 100,000 population, or the number of deaths per 100,000 of population. And if you look at those sorts of measures, I think we're really middle of the pack compared to other comparable countries like European countries or Australia or the US or Canada in terms of experience from the Omicron wave.
So just for clarity, 72nd. Total cases per million population, 72nd. And our population would put us at 126. So look, I mean, I know it's maybe there's an unanswerable question. Maybe lots of those other countries aren't reporting their numbers the same. Who knows? But it did give me a shock the other day when I saw we had jumped up so high. Just based on how we had been performing, and I just wondered if there's a reasonable explanation behind this. But yeah, I hear what you're saying. It's always a hard way to finish off, but where to from here? I mean, what's the modelling showing us from here, especially with that 7-day average looking like it's increasing?
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky to know what to make of case numbers at the moment because we've had those 2 long weekends which have thrown the numbers out a bit. So, I mean, I'd be surprised if we saw, a big second wave now. We might see a bit of a blip, school holidays, Easter, long weekends and things. But overall, I think the trend is still downward, but it's certainly getting slower. And I think we are likely to see a second wave at some point. Exactly when is very difficult to say, but it's quite likely that we would get a second wave at some point during the winter or spring. One thing that is a bit concerning at the moment is the age distribution of the cases. It's really important that we keep a close eye on who is getting infected, not just the total case numbers, because exactly. Because case numbers have dropped quite sharply in the younger age groups, but they've actually dropped more slowly, or even stayed quite close to the peak in the over 60s and over 70s. And of course, these groups are much higher risk.
Let me just spell out what we're looking at for people who are joining us. You can see that from under 10-year-olds is tailing down, under 20-year-olds is tailing down. Basically 20 to 50 is kind of staying pretty static, but above 50 to 59, 60 to 69, you can see that they're all tailing up. So as a percentage or proportion of the overall cases, they're all rising, which is what you're talking about. So the older age demographics are becoming a bigger proportion of the daily cases. The middle-aged people, shall we say, are staying about neutral, and the younger people are starting to drop off.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and this will potentially contribute to hospital numbers staying high and deaths staying high for longer. It's part of that longer tail, because these older age groups are just inherently higher risk.
Yeah, and I guess that comes back to that idea about looking after your nan and papa, and when people have changed their perspective, and like we were just talking to George earlier, who works at Otago University, that there's far fewer masks. I've got 2 kids at 2 different schools, and we've been told, I think, that we're not going to be enforcing mask laws anymore, and I'm just like, it feels like, maybe my naivety is hoping to get rid of this. I did hear someone internationally say, we misunderstood this because we thought everyone would go inside for a month and this thing would be gone forever. And of course, everyone didn't go inside for a month. They decided to stay out and do things and continue to go to hairdressers behind closed doors and various bits and bobs, and it's hung around. And that I think one of the big concerns for me, and one of the concerns around the numbers today, is almost the attitude towards it of everyone throwing their hands up in the air. I know groups of people, although I think it's 1 in 5 people in Southern have had COVID. A lot of people are saying it's 2 to 3 times the number, probably. So it could be up to 3 in 5. So maybe 50 to 60% of people in Southern have had it. And obviously I'm only talking about Southern because they're the stats I look at to impact me. So let's say half of the people have had it and half haven't. I know groups of people, some that are particularly, against things like vaccines, where 90% within a group have had it. And it's like, I struggle sometimes to be gracious, because I'm like, if you catch this thing and you're looking after yourself and you're taking precautions, I feel bad for you. If you're basically, just throwing to the wind, going, I don't believe in this stuff, I don't like this stuff, and 90% of you are getting it within a group, I'm like, I struggle to be gracious to people and not think you guys are the main reason that this thing is freaking hanging on. And I don't want Nan and Papa to get sick and die, especially looking at the numbers that we're just talking about them going up. And we need to look after one another better. Still, although the message from the government is orange, you have more freedom. So there's a disparity there in my mind.
Yeah, just to say, I completely agree with the comment about, we need to look after each other. We need to particularly be aware of high risk groups, visiting elderly relatives, visiting aged residential care, this sort of thing. These are the highest risk people in our society, and we really we can't let our guard drop, because there are still high levels of COVID out there, and so really being aware of that risk when you're interacting with people in those groups, and taking the appropriate precautions. Wear a mask. If you feel at all sick, don't go. But just because you feel fine, don't assume you're clear. If you're visiting aged residential care, I think it's a good idea to do a RAT beforehand if you can, to just give you that extra layer of protection.
So the payoff from this is, if this is going to be around for a lot longer, however long that is, in its various forms and variants. What we need to change for our attitude for society is, like, we've all been in situations, I'm sure, whether it was when you're a student and a part-time worker, or whether it was a full-time worker, where you've been sick and your boss has said there's no one to replace you, you really do need to come in. There needs to be an attitude change where if you're sick, you stay home, and bosses and employers need to be like, yep, sweet as, you're sick, stay at home, we'll make it work. And also, as you say, like, we've had examples during this peak of, people turning up with their kids, meeting with other kids, and everyone's sick in the family. It's like, actually, this is the way that we avoid it while we can, and to go from there. So I think that's the caring for one another now, to me, feels a bit more like, if you're sick, don't come. If you're sick, don't go. If you're in a position of, like, if you're a principal or if you're a boss and someone has to be away, a student then you allow that to happen. Maybe part of the policy changes need to be more sick days. Most full-time workers have 5-6 sick days a week. Maybe that needs to be extended now as a way that therefore we can have those choices to keep others well around us and ourselves. Maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think sick leave entitlement is absolutely crucial. And it's not just for COVID, it's for other respiratory viruses and nasties that we have spreading around, particularly during winter. So certainly making sure that people don't feel obligated to go into work when they're sick is absolutely crucial.
This could ironically work the other way. I mean, I remember watching QI, Stephen Fry on QI. He's a very smart man, and I think gives out good information most of the time. And he talked about when smoking was on planes, the air was actually cleaner because of the system that they had in place to have to clean the air when smoking was on the planes than it is now. Now, I accept that that's probably true because it was done as a fact on QI, and maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But I wonder now, with this thing being around, with this bad thing being around, that we may actually be healthier if we take the attitude of looking after other people. And actually, I am feeling a bit sick, so I won't go. Whereas in 2018, if we were feeling a bit sick, we went anyway. So I wonder if kind of the reverse could happen if we took that attitude of still thinking about looking after other people and doing it by not passing on whatever sniffle or thing that we had, we just won't go. I don't know, just a thought.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, having a focus on clean air and good ventilation in our buildings is really important for COVID. And that has benefits for other things as well. So, if that reduces the amount of flu that's going around during the winter, the amount of RSV, the potential for measles outbreaks, because, people are worried about measles vaccination rates having fallen during the pandemic. So we're prone to measles outbreaks. But those sorts of measures focusing on clean air and also on the sick leave entitlement will have benefits across the board. So it's not just for COVID. So these are the sorts of measures we need to be looking at. They're sustainable long-term protections that mitigate against COVID, but also reduce the risk from other things and just generally result in a healthier society.
Yeah, and that feels like that's the policy change. I mean, the government can't just, whatever government's in 18 months, you can't just go, right, everyone's got their freedoms now, go to it. You got to go, everyone's got their freedoms now, but because of the change of the world right now, as we're living in this world, we need to now also give you guys the ability to stay home if you need to because you're sick. There needs to be like an addendum to that. Everyone's got their freedoms now, and that's where policy comes in.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Hey, Michael, thanks for joining us again today. We really appreciate when you come on board and educate me, even if no one else gets anything. But I enjoy speaking to you, and I appreciate you giving us some more time this morning.
Thanks. My pleasure.
All right. Cheers, Michael. Appreciate that. Well, there we go. Oh, man, I don't know how I feel about that, George. It's like the idea of it. I've rallied against this idea about this thing being around forever, quote unquote, forever.
Yeah, what a horrible thought.
Yeah, when's the end coming? Oh, man, I don't know. We'll have to see. Maybe, I mean, people have said that, there may be an instance where you kind of push this into a yearly vaccine that gets pumped into you along with the flu vaccine. I've never had a flu vaccine. And it's not because I'm anti-flu vaccine. It's just that it's never really been a big thing, but maybe from now on, it's going to be what I end up doing in the COVID vaccine will be a part of that. And at some stage, we will just think about it like a flu. Not that we're thinking about it like that today. And it's always careful to say that because people go, oh, Pat said it's just like the flu. No, not saying that at all. You don't often lose your sense of smell with the flu, for example. Go Away says, How do you feel about the mask mandates in school being removed? To be honest, I struggle with it. But after just listening to Michael, maybe the change needs to come of living with now rather than avoiding it. And a lot of people have been saying that for a long time, but maybe because it's now so obvious that it's not going to go away, and we really didn't know that until potentially Omicron. Like when Delta was here, there was still kind of a elimination plan, but now that it's not, I mean, it's that thing that people can't wear masks forever. This is my concern, and I said it to Michael, and I'll say it again, is that currently in Southern, and I'm only talking about Southern, you can look up your own numbers for wherever you are in the world, but currently in Southern, we have about 3 times the number of daily cases than we should to be in that safe zone. So I think mask mandates in Southern should fucking be in place at the moment to help us get those numbers down. And then when we hit that mark, like this is the thing that fucks me off most, right? And I'll put this straight on Jacinda's desk. Yeah. When she was asked in a press conference about why is Auckland staying in red, their numbers have gone, why can't they get down to orange and the rest of the country stay in red like they did it when it was the other way around with Delta? She pulled out a fucking graph and she pointed to the numbers on the graph and she said, see that curve there? When the numbers get to there, that means we feel like it's safe to get into Auckland, into orange. They're not quite there yet. Why don't we have the reverse? Why don't we have a fucking graph that says in Southern or whatever region you're in, when the numbers get there, it's okay to get out of red? Because at the moment, they're fucking 3 times higher than where that graph would be. So that's what I'm mostly frustrated about at the moment. And the greatest of respect to the conversation we just had about numbers ticking up because of school holidays. We were told before school holidays that 2-week break would help the numbers because kids aren't in schools, and that's where a lot of the cases were coming from. So I feel at the moment frustrated with the messaging, and I feel at the moment frustrated because it feels like there's been decisions made based on things like people wanting to go away for Easter and a government not wanting to be seen as the bad guys. Where actually, I'll say it again, I'm just talking about Southern. In Southern at the moment, our daily cases are 3 times what they need to be for the projections to consider us a safe zone. And if they were that in Auckland, I guarantee you the country would not be in orange right now. That's why I'm off in general. So for your mask mandates, I think we should have mask mandates in Southern. For the rest of the country, I don't know your numbers as well. Sorry. So I don't have any comment. You can look at them for yourself. Just think about, though, if you want to do this research for yourself, look up your DHB, whether it's Waitemata or whether it's Carpetan Coast or whatever. Just Google number of citizens DHB and put your number, right? And if it's 400,000 people, that means based on that idea of 1,000 people per day per million, if it's 400,000, then you should expect 400 a day to be in that safe zone. If it's 150,000, you should expect 150 a day. If it's 2 million, you should expect 2,000 per day. That's how we've been told you work it out. So in Southern, when it's 300 per day and we're getting cases per day of 988, mandates should still be in place for masks, in my opinion. There you go. I'm off my soapbox, George.
Yeah, Richard says here, polio fix with 1 jab. Farmer can make gross profits based on that model. They want a subscription.
Yeah.
Subscription model. Yeah, I mean that's the thing. The political economy of the matter, the power that's behind these things is of interest to me. And I'm definitely skeptical that that they have our best interests.
Yeah, I mean, I understand I mean, to be honest, mate, if we got an injection or a vaccine that was a one-off and it did you for 20 or like I've been to the travel parts of the world where you've had to have jabs to go there, polio vaccines, that kind of stuff, and they last you 10, 15, 20 years. If you've got when you step on a rusty nail, what's that one called, when you can get whatever that is from stepping on a rusty nail, that lasts you 30 year tetanus. Yeah. So if there was a farmer that came out with a 30-year COVID thing for this, the amount of money that they'd be able to charge 5 times as much for it, and the amount of money they'd make of it would be insurmountable. So I mean, I get what Rich is saying, but I don't think it's reality when it comes to the business of it.
I don't know. They're fucking greedy.
Yeah.
Like they hooked America on fucking oxys.
Yeah. I mean,
anything past them.
But then again, I guess to I mean, I don't like doing this all the time, but I've done it twice today to negate my own point again, is that this thing is evolving and changing, and there's nothing to say that a 30-year vaccine would then cover the variant that comes out next year anyway. And I guess that's what Michael said when he talks about seasonal viruses. If they're changing and morphing and adapting and becoming something else, then who's to say that you can have a one-off? I mean, if there was a one-off vaccine for this that was focused on the first variant, maybe by the time Delta came, it would already be null and void, even though it was sold as a one-off. You know what I mean? So I don't know. Like, we can't get a one-off flu vaccine, can we? Because it changes every year. So, anywho, I feel like we're done. George, how do you feel?
Yep, it was a good show. Yep.
Now tomorrow, we had confirmed earlier in the week, but we haven't exactly confirmed for tomorrow yet. But I will say it like it's going to happen. The Chief Executive Officer of Tuans, Craig Young, will be coming on to have a chat with us about CNN Plus, streaming services, digital services, probably a little bit of Twitter in there as well.
So for our viewers, what's Tuans?
Tuans is you want me to give you the exact thing, don't you? Telecommunications. Hang on, I'll get it for you exactly because I can never remember is it called an acronym? It is called an acronym, isn't it? Tuans is about Tuans. Oh, did you get it? No, I got it before you. Did you get it? Oh, you put it up. Association for the Users of Digital Technology and Connectivity.
So a non-governmental organization advocating for internet users, or
it's around digital.
Digital.
Yeah. So independent voice for users navigating a complex digital world, prepare New Zealanders for a digital future. We ensure Tuans is operationally positioned to achieve its purpose. That's what they are about. I'm just trying to think what's the actual. It's funny when you come to a site like this and you go and can't actually see what their name stands for, and I can't remember. Telecommunication Users and Associates of New Zealand, something like that.
User Association.
Yep.
Tech Users Association of New Zealand. Cool.
Oh, there you go. Tech Users Association. Yeah. So we'll be having a chat with them. Well, when I say having a chat with them, he said yes earlier in the week. Well, and I've emailed him today, so hopefully that'll be on. Is there anything else booked in for tomorrow we need to talk about or tease out, or we just see what happens tomorrow?
Yeah. Let's see what the news is in the morning.
We'll see what the latest Elon Musk news is, because that's typically all we're doing at the moment anyway. So we'll see what happens. All right. Thanks, guys, for joining us. 11 o'clock tomorrow morning. We'll see you for the last show of the week on Big Hairy News. Thank you for joining us. Remember, you can always participate. You can always get involved, whether it's during the live show or, comments and stuff afterwards. You can find us on Twitter. You can find us on Twitter for now. You can find us on Twitter for now. Shall I do that thing before we leave?
Yeah, Elon Musk is going to ban me.
Because he's going to ban us.
I'm way too cool.
Like this.
Well, it looks like Twitter's gone. They accepted the money, and Elon Stalin is taking over. So fuck you, Twitter, and goodbye forever, you insane Q-like forum. Or soon to be insane like Q-like forum. Peace out. Bye.
That's how funny that
this is directly to you.
The liberal mind is, that they think Elon Musk is Stalin.
Yeah. The funniest one of these. This is only a minute long. We can talk over it. Everyone getting off.
That's what I think of it. Fuck Elon Musk.
Today,
is this one? I think what she says at the end. That's funniest.
Elon Musk, or however you say his name. I'm not interested in staying on Twitter anymore because of this. And I think there's a lot of people that are about to leave. So I just wanted to let everyone know that you can find me here. I'm going to also share this on Twitter before I deactivate my account. So that anyone...
Sorry, I think that's kind of hilarious. Fuck you, Twitter. I'm out of there, Twitter. I'm no longer involved with Twitter. I don't want to do Twitter anymore. By the way, I will tweet this before I leave, just to make sure you all know that I don't want to be on Twitter anymore.
That's indicative of the situation we find ourselves in, right? That we can't oppose the medium because it's the medium that we use to do all of our discourse, all our debate, and that sort of thing, right? So it's hard to it's hard to escape the matrix.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be too naive about this, but I don't think Elon buying it's going to make that big a difference to daily use of Twitter, me or you.
Daily use of Twitter, no. I think my problems are a bit more grander than that.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just a dumb simpleton, George. Maybe one day we'll be able to communicate on a higher level and you can educate me. But I think that, I think someone made a very good point. It might have been yourself, George, the other day when we talked about it's the algorithms behind Twitter, which will be interesting to see what happens. Like if Elon Musk had a particular political bent he wanted to get out there, basically one person can decide to elevate voices. Joe Rogan might all of a sudden get the most voices in the world because they're best mates. Someone says, I see no difference with Twitter being sold to Elon as compared to what? I see no difference with what?
Probably how it was, right?
Well, maybe we don't know that yet, but I thought maybe we're saying I see no difference with it compared to him buying Tesla, and I was going to say, well, the difference is Tesla's not really a marketplace of ideas.
But
But
if Simon's comparing it to how it was, he's right, and that's the problem that I guess I want to highlight by talking about Elon buying Twitter is the fact that these places, the public sphere is dictated by the whims of the market and investors, and that can never be a tool of democracy.
if I put on my sort of figuring this out cap, whatever that's called, and go the literal marketplace, like think about, because the reason we use that example is because in the olden days, medieval times, hundreds of years ago, people would go to the town square and debate. Is there any different, like if there was two town squares and everyone turned up to one of them because of whatever resources, whether the best fishmonger was there, so they went there anyway, is there some similarities between kind of controlling some amount of public discourse in that instance as there is in this, or is it is completely different? I'm thinking as I'm talking, that's why it's coming out a bit stilted.
The public square has always had, there's always a political dimension to the space itself, right?
Yeah.
So for example, the local publican owns the pub where people are having, or the beer hall where Hitler's doing his speech and that sort of thing. But the owner of the beer hall where Hitler's doing his big speech doesn't sort of control the language or the algorithm or the parameters for discussion in the way that
I'd push back on that a little bit. I'd push back just a little bit by saying, let's just, this is obviously a very hypothetical example we're giving, but let's just say the owner of that pool hall, banned a handful of people from his establishment. And in banning those people, kept their views out. So they could actually manipulate the conversation in their beer hall.
Yeah, and in a sort of bold, like just not allowing people into the beer hall.
It's like people on Fox News.
That's what I'm talking about. Is that the town square always has had that political dimension. But the social media is just so total, right? We're carrying it in our pockets and conduct so much of our day-to-day activity on it.
I think it's kind of a version of shadow banning that we hear about as well. It's like people on Fox News, hosts on Fox News, they go, I've never been told by a boss to say anything. But what Fox News does is they hire people that they know are going to say things in a certain way. So the management's able to say, we've never instructed them to say anything. The hosts are able to say, we've never been told to say anything. We're fair and balanced. But the hireage policy is we will only hire people who are going to say things in a certain way. Much like the beer hall conversation, if you only allowed access to people, let's say in Hitler's time, who were supporters of Hitler, then that's the only view you're going to allow in there. So there's other ways of getting around the whole thing between putting your thumb on the scale without actively necessarily saying I'm putting my thumb on the scale.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing about the public square having political discourse. It's like that Fox News again, fair and balanced. We talked about this earlier today. The reason they're not fair and balanced is because they give argument equal weight sometimes where equal weight doesn't necessitate. The pedophile ring in the pizza parlor didn't require equal weight to debate that on a television show because it was utterly ludicrous. So when Elon Musk says it's going to be politically neutral, it's like Fox News saying it's going to be fair and balanced. There's no such thing as politically neutral because the scale, the weight, the thumb will be put on it somehow to make it apolitical. And probably, I don't mean apolitical as in not political. I mean A, comma, political, and B, probably lean one way or the other, which may come from the users. Like if all the liberals left TikTok now, Elon would have to do nothing, and it would be a voice piece of the right. Like as an extreme example, you know what? If Jack banned all the conservatives, it would be a voice piece of the left. There's ways you can turn the conversation into a conversation of ideology without necessarily saying we're a left-wing group or we're a right-wing group. You can just do it other ways as well.
Yeah.
Anywho, so maybe that's a good reason for all those people leaving Twitter to not leave Twitter. So maybe leaving Twitter will actually turn it into an alt-right communication thing. Maybe they need to stay there to make sure it doesn't happen. Maybe. Okay, I like it when we say it's time for us to wrap up, and then 15 minutes we're still talking, George. It's my favorite thing. Thank you, people, for joining us again today. We will see you tomorrow morning from 11 a.m. for another episode of Big
Thanks
Hairy
for
Human.
the interaction, guys.
Yeah,
That's
we appreciate you guys being involved. And remember, follow us on Twitter and #share our shit. All right, all the best. Do all.